Ben, at this point, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Supervisor Bowen. Can everybody hear me? As Doug indicated, really the last issue left in the ORES proceeding for South Ripley Solar is whether there is a sufficient plan to mitigate the loss of forest associated with the project. All right, so let me bring it back a little bit to earlier in the fall. You'll recall the town filed a statement of noncompliance of local law. Fire districts also filed an issue statement at that time. As a result of those filings, the administrative law judges issued a ruling where they denied party status to the fire district, and they found that there were no issues raised except for one, which was not raised by anybody. And they said that the forest impact mitigation plan that had been provided, there wasn't sufficient evidence for them to hold that it complied with either the ORES requirements for mitigating lost forest or the requirements in the local law for mitigating lost forest land. After getting that ruling, ConnectGen, South Ripley Solar appealed it. And as a result of that appeal, the executive director of ORES said, nope, this is an issue, you have to adjudicate it. As a result of that, about a week ago or so, the administrative law judge put forth a procedural schedule for a hearing on this issue and said that the three parties to this would be the applicant, ConnectGen, ORES, and the town. Shortly after that, ConnectGen proposed that we should try to settle this issue via negotiation and a stipulation, and proposed the date of December 16th to do that. The reason it's so short is because the hearing is set to start in the end of December and early January. So when testimony is due. So there's a very short turnaround time for all of this, unfortunately. I advised the town that they should, sit down with ConnectGen and see what the offer is. So last Friday, I, Supervisor Bowen, Deputy Supervisor Rowe, Francis Cabot from Labella, all went to Buffalo, and we met in Labella's offices there with ConnectGen, with Isaac Phillips, with Jim Moscato, and with a couple representatives of EDR. And at that meeting, they provided us a couple of documents. They provided us a draft stipulation, which would resolve the issue that's being adjudicated. And they provided us a draft, basically, mitigation plan, forest mitigation plan. The town did not agree to that on site. We reviewed it. And right after the meeting on Saturday, I sent all the documents we received to every board member, and they've all had a chance to review them. At the same time, last Saturday, I promised the board that Labella and I would separately be reviewing this plan and providing our input to them before this meeting, which we did this morning. So that's everything that's happened to date. Tonight, I'm here to talk about this. There are also a couple of representatives from Labella here. Dave, are you here?
Yeah, I'm present. I also have Mitchell Thomas with me.
Great. So Dave and Mitchell were the ones that reviewed this for Labella and drafted their analysis. And they're here primarily to answer any questions you have and also provide a couple of comments I'll be asking for later on. So the first thing I want to do is I kind of want to go over what the issue is, what ConnectGen is proposing to do about it, and what the form of mitigation is. So let's start with the basic issue, okay? The basic issue is that this project, to be built, is going to have to cut down forest. Quite a bit of it, unfortunately. The total numbers that were originally proposed in the application, pull up my other sheet here, were 351 acres of beech maple forest, 102 acres of hemlock northern hardwood forest, 62 acres of successional northern hardwoods, and 8 acres of pine plantation, totaling a total of 523 acres of forest that would be basically cut down in order to accommodate the facility, which is a pretty high number for a project of this size, admittedly, and that explains why ORES is concerned about it. So that was the initial amount that was suggested in the application. After this issue arose, ConnectGen talked to ORES And ORES basically asked them to apply a larger setback from certain steep slopes that had hardwoods on them. And in order to meet that setback, ConnectGen is considering removing about 88 acres of panels, which would result in saving 88 acres of forest. And that might also result reduce the power output of the project by up to 30 megawatts. We'll see if that comes to fruition or not, but it's a possibility. So again, we had the problem, which was 523 acres of forest. The first thing ConnectGen tried to do was eliminate some of the panels to eliminate the need to cut down forest. They came up with about 88 acres that they're planning to not cut down anymore. That's the avoidance. After eliminating those, we come down to 435 acres of forest. So now the question is, of those 435 acres, how much mitigation do we need? So to answer that question, we have to look at our local law. And if you look at section 1508G of our solar law, what it says is that removal of existing trees larger than 6 inches for solar energy development should be minimized to the maximum extent practicable, okay? And then, even more importantly, applicants should offset the loss of any mature or old growth forest through conservation of the same amount of existing similar habitat or creation of new sites to host mature or old growth forest. So what this is essentially saying is, if you cut down an acre of mature old growth forest, you have to conserve an acre of mature old growth forest. So the first step here is to take this 435 acres and try and figure out how many of those would be classified as mature old growth forest, something that needs to be actually mitigated. So ConnectGen has already taken a crack at doing this based on satellite imagery, and they have knocked it down to only 349 acres of the 435 is actually mature or old growth. One of the things we're going to talk about later is we're going to, we're asking for a forester to truth check that, but just for the sake of argument right now, we're going to assume that 349 is the number. We'll talk more about why we're going to do that in a minute. Okay. So again, just for the sake of argument, we'll say that of everything that's being cut down, like 349 is mature and needs to be mitigated in some way. In order to do that, ConnectGen made the following proposal. This was the original proposal that we received last Friday. They wanted to accomplish 28 acres of that through conserving wetlands, which would also be double counted as wetlands mitigation and conservation. Many of those wetlands, if not all of them, would be treed. The second form of mitigation that was proposed was counting the 49 acres of visual impact screening and existing hedgerows or vegetative screening as visual mitigation. The third was 38 acres of replanted forest in areas that are temporarily cleared for construction. And then the fourth would be a total of about 234 acres of conserved private land, where they would have to go out and get conservation easements from a private landowner or landowners. And the form of those easements are, still up to negotiation. So that's the problem. That's the initial plan we were given for conservation. Labella has looked at this, and I have looked at this, and our initial advice to the board here is that, one, in order to sign off on this, we really need to have a provision that requires a qualified forester to go out and make sure all these numbers are right. And the agreement needs to be able to change so that in the final form, the amount of mitigation goes up or down based on the amount of actual old growth forest that's there. So I want to make clear, all these numbers we're talking about are just placeholders. We're not going to be held to those. There's going to be a consulting forester that goes out and truth checks all this. So that's kind of the first issue. The second issue is what form of mitigation should really be considered mitigation. All of these are generally, acceptable forms of mitigation, with the exception of using the visual impact screening. Those are relatively small, 35-foot wide plantings. It's really not forest habitat. So, I feel that shouldn't be included. So we'd like to push those back into additional just conserved land that's conserved through a conservation easement. So, the bottom line is, if ConnectGen is willing to agree that, one, after the stipulation is signed, there will be a consulting forester hired, and somebody will actually make sure that we have identified the right amount of mature trees and that the right amount is being mitigated, I would not object to the board signing the stipulation. Two, I would also want to make clear that, counting visual impact screening, whether it's stuff they're planting or something that already exists, should not be included. I conveyed that to the attorney, Jim Moscato, 2 days ago, and he got back to me today and said they would agree to that in principle. I don't have the final language that they're willing to put into the mitigation plan, though. So based on all that, I have also given the board tonight to review a resolution. What that resolution would do is it would authorize Supervisor Bowen to execute a stipulation subject to review of the final stipulation and the final mitigation plan by me and by Labella to make sure that they are incorporating these changes we want. And those specific changes are outlined in the resolution, which will be read out publicly in a minute. So that's where we are. Now, I know before I open it up to questions from the board that Dave did want to take the opportunity to quickly talk to ConnectGen, because he has some pretty specific requests for the consulting forester when they do their work. So Dave, is now a good time?
Yeah, sure. I don't know so much request, just a recommendation. If we're trying to build an appropriate mitigation plan based on what's located on the site, what I would recommend is having a forester identify or almost delineate forest stands that, they should give you information that includes species composition, age class, size class. The town law basically says anything over 6 inches or greater. But to appropriately mitigate, it would be nice to be able to take into consideration age class and species composition of the actual forest stands that exist on the site. It's not necessarily a timber cruise, just cruising the site for available timber, board feet or basal area or anything like that. It's actually kind of a delineation of the forest stands that exist on the site and what age class they are, so there can be a determination made on whether the mitigation proposed is appropriate. That's really what we need for info.
Are there any other questions from the board about, the scope of the problem or what ConnectGen is proposing to do about it?
That answered a couple of questions I had. Because I looked at the email, I couldn't find it again today. I don't know what happened to it, but it was showing the different where they were going to put it, and I didn't understand because I didn't really see what the mitigation part was. Because they had dots on there, but they didn't really change anything. They just said that was the mitigation. I didn't understand that part.
Yeah, so
you understand it?
Yeah, not completely, but
what's this?
That part of the mitigation.
Is it common practice to double count wetlands?
Yeah, that don't make sense to me either.
Honestly, I don't know the answer to that, but I can tell you that if the goal is to conserve the same amount of forest that's being eliminated, either way it's being conserved. So I don't personally have a problem with double counting it. Also, that's a relatively small percentage of the total amount that's being conserved. So, if the board does want to push back on that, we can, but I believe Labella did look at this, and Dave, I don't know if you have the numbers off the top of your head, but it looked like maybe roughly half of that is already forested, and the rest would be planted, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think there would be 13 acres of wetland mitigation that would be forested wetland creation. That's really the only thing that I would consider to be appropriate to double count in terms of wetland mitigation versus forest mitigation, because you're actually creating additional forest. But again, as Ben said, that's a pretty small portion of the overall. It's I believe 12 or 13 acres, somewhere to that tune.
Well, I kind of thought mitigation was if they cut 6 acres down, they needed to plant 6 acres someplace else. And I didn't see if they were doing anything like that.
Well, so they can either plant it, which is creation, or they can take existing and conserve it so it cannot be, completely clear cut or cut down.
They pay a landowner not to cut that down to the ground.
No,
They can still forest it like they do at the club, but they can't cut it.
They can't,
They can't strip cut it.
it would be a conservation easement, which would mean the landowner would agree to not clear cut
But
the
they can
woodlands.
still
However,
forest.
they could continue to manage the timber and cut timber and firewood and whatnot as they have been.
All right,
But
that makes a little more sense to me now.
yeah, they would get a stipend, whatever the agreed
To
amount
do
would
it.
be from the developer to the property owners.
But I didn't really see where that was coming from in that email.
And the largest share of the mitigation would be conservation easement.
Yeah.
I guess my question, Ben, on the conservation easement side of things, who will be policing that for the years to come? Property is signed up, for the conservation easement. And like I say, down the road, who's going to be responsible for policing that this property is not clear cut?
So the answer is we don't know yet, but let me back up a step, right, about what a conservation easement is. So when a conservation easement is granted, you're giving a third party a right to enforce the conservation of the property. So Doug's question about who's going to enforce it is highly relevant. What you have in front of you right now is not a completely final plan, which has everything it needs for South Ripley Solar to actually begin construction. This is a plan to get to the final plan. And what it's doing is it's saying, look, first we need to find out exactly how much forest that needs to be conserved is being cut down. And then once that happens, it's setting forth a plan for how we're going to conserve it. The numbers that are being thrown out right now, roughly 235 acres of new conservation easement, might be low, might be high. But once we have that number pinned down, then ConnectGen, not the town, has got to find the landowners that will actually sell those easements or potentially give them. There are tax benefits. And then the question becomes, what are the terms of the easement? How are they achieving the conservation of the forest land? Who is going to be responsible for enforcing it? We don't need to pin down those details today because we have asked for and been given the power to be part of the process where those easements are put together. So Section 9 of the stipulation requires the permittee to work with us when they are with respect to the proposed mitigation location and the mechanism for preservation of the term of the mitigation plan, okay? So there's frankly not time to figure out the answers to those questions before the 16th. So instead we're agreeing that we're gonna figure it out later and the town is going to be involved in it. I have a few ideas I can throw out there for you about who should be doing this. There are a couple land trusts in your area that would be perfect for this if they chose to do this. This is exactly what land trusts do. They buy conservation easements and they enforce them. And a lot of them are very flexible with regard to the terms as long as the development rights are essentially being extinguished. You can still cut it. Personally, I love to see them open to the public. They can still be hunted, but you don't have to necessarily do any of those things. So that's one really potential good candidate for holding the conservation easement. The town is another option. I don't know if the town wants to do it. It might or might not, but towns can also hold the rights to a conservation easement. And then it will be the town responsible for enforcing. Regardless of who it is, it should be somebody who's probably an organization that's, going to be around forever, and that can, keep an eye on all this, because, a conservation easement is meaningless, nobody knows it's there. I mean, in my town last year, there was a conserved farm with an easement on it, and someone tried to put up a grow farm, which would have violated that easement until someone realized it was there. So yes, you have to know it's there, someone's got to enforce it.
So I will add to that, just so everyone's on the same page. The function of a conservation easement is that that property is essentially the rights to that property are sold to a third party. That third party will own the timber rights to that property and police them, essentially. So it's not necessarily that it's just an agreement between the developer and a landowner. That property conservation easement will be, sold or gifted or whatever to a third party that'll manage the rights on that property appropriately per the easement agreement. That's how those are typically progressed.
How long do they last? Is it forever or just till they no longer generate electricity?
The easements would last as the length of the project.
No, the easement would be forever. This is permanent, right?
Right.
So this is a property right. So these
Okay.
easements, so this is permanent conservation. And so typically, right, when a land trust buys the easement and they obtain the development rights, frequently they will extinguish those rights forever. So it can never be developed. They can't be sold. But again, these are the things that, this is exactly why the town needs to be involved in this down the line over the next half year, because their input on, what is the form of the conservation easement, what are the terms matters. What is permanent conservation to the town?
One organization that might be willing to get involved in this is the Western New York Land Conservancy.
I had them in mind.
Okay,
If you have a contact, you should reach out, though. That'd be great.
I've got it.
Another land trust recommended them to me today, specifically.
Yeah.
There's also a Chautauqua Land Trust, which I think is dramatically smaller, but could potentially do it.
Are there any stipulations currently in place that would restrict how far outside the project area they could potentially go for a conservation easement? Or does
Let me
that-
double check the actual language of the law. I think the law says in town, but
Yeah, I think whether it states it or not, I think you would prefer to preserve forested property within your township.
But it doesn't necessarily have to be in the project area.
no, I don't see anything in the law that requires that. The question is, what does the law require here, and how does the town interpret the law? And my advice to the town would be that, somewhere in the town is sufficient. This doesn't say it needs to be in specifically the project area. It just says you have to mitigate the loss, which I would think would be in the town.
Okay. Any other questions from the board? Any questions or comments from
I didn't know.
anyone from Connect Gen?
How about from the public?
Not yet.
Before you do a motion, you allow connection to, but not the people that elected you?
We are the people that you were elected. We'll do that at the, after.
How about before a motion, you're allowing connection to speak, but you won't allow the public? Before you make a motion?
Connect Gen is a developer.
And you represent us,
We are the taxpayers.
and we are the taxpayers, and we are the people that you represent, and you're not representing us.
Any other questions from the board? Ben, any more comments?
If ConnectGen is on the call, do you have any maps that, can we show the maps that you had at the meeting, or no? Are those publicly available? I don't have them.
So generally the project map is publicly available.
Yeah.
The specific maps going into the stipulation are not yet finalized, but they would be publicly available very shortly. And then generally, we don't have any comments in addition to the discussion that was had today.
Is there an avoidance map that can be shared yet or no?
Probably in the next day or two.
Okay. So again, I want to be clear to the board that what the resolution says, it's not authorizing Doug to sign it right now. It's authorizing Doug to sign it after we get the final documents, the final plan, the maps like that. Labella takes a quick look, I take a look, and then, subject to our review, Doug can sign it. We don't expect anything in there other than what we've mentioned tonight. You know what our requests for changes are. They're clearly laid out in the resolution. And again, the only thing that's really at issue here for the town is how much land needs to be conserved as required by the law. And is the method sufficient? Does it meet the requirements of the law? Ultimately, the town can't choose exactly where, because this conservation is going to come from private landowners. The town can't force landowners to conserve their land. So, I mean, if the concern out there is that we're not doing a good enough job of thinking about the best possible places to be conserved, that's frankly not something the town has power over, unfortunately. What we do is the form of conservation, and we intend to use it and make sure that it is real, meaningful conservation that lasts forever. And we intend to make sure that the town isn't getting shorted and that the right amount of forest is being conserved. And that's the idea of having consulting forests to go out and try to, do a complete survey of what's there and what needs to be offset and mitigated.
Okay. Board, any?
No.
Yeah, okay, that's good. All right, I will read the resolution. Resolution of the Town Board of Ripley authorizing execution of South Ripley Solar Forest Mitigation Stipulation. Whereas ConnectGen Chautauqua County LLC, the company, has submitted an application to the New York State Office of Renewable Energy Siting pursuant to Section 94C of the New York Executive Law and its implementing regulations to obtain a permit to construct a solar-powered electric generating facility on land located in the town of Ripley. Whereas on October 12th, 2022, the administrative law judges assigned to this proceeding held that a substantial and significant factual dispute existed between the applicant and staff of the Office of Renewable Energy Siting that required adjudication. The issue as defined by the ALJs was whether applicant has demonstrated that potential significant adverse impacts due to clearing of forests are avoided or minimized to the maximum extent practicable, or whether applicant is required to submit a final forest clearing plan and forest mitigation plan that complies with ORA's regulations and Section 1508G of Ripley Solar Energy Zoning Law. Whereas on November 17th, 2022, the ALJs issued a memorandum advising that the Executive Director of ORS had exercised his jurisdiction to require a hearing on the forest mitigation issue, or otherwise consider a stipulation executed by all parties resolving that issue. Whereas on December 2nd, 2022, representatives of the town of Ripley met with representatives of ConnectGen to discuss a potential stipulation, at which meeting the company provided a draft stipulation and accompanying forest clearing and mitigation plan memo. Whereas based on feedback from the town of Ripley Special Legal Counsel and Labella Associates, ConnectGen provided a revised draft stipulation attached to this resolution that would provide the town of Ripley with the right to have input with respect to the proposed mitigation, location, and the mechanism for preservation for the term of the mitigation plan. Whereas a draft forest clearing and conceptual mitigation plan attached to this resolution proposes conservation of 349 acres of forest as required by local law and avoidance of 88 acres of forest by removal of up to 30 megawatts of solar panels necessary to meet a 100-foot setback from certain forested slopes. Whereas based on advice from legal counsel and Labella's associates, the town of Ripley desires the need for 349 acres of conserved forest be confirmed by a qualified consulting forester before a final conservation and mitigation plan is submitted by South Ripley Solar as a compliance filing. Whereas the town of Ripley understands findings of the consulting forester may require more or less conservation than the proposed 349 acres. And whereas ORES has set a deadline of December 16th, 2022 for ORES, ConnectGen, and the town to enter into a stipulation resolving the forest mitigation issue. Now therefore it is resolved that the town board hereby authorizes the town supervisor to execute the proposed forest mitigation stipulation subject to review of the final stipulation document and accompanying forest clearing and conceptual mitigation plan by legal counsel and Labella's. And therefore the town supervisor shall only execute the stipulation if the accompanying forest clearing and conceptual mitigation plan does not include visual impact plantings and vegetation as mitigation, requires an additional 49 acres to be preserved via agreement with private landowner, and includes a term requiring confirmation of the final amount of acreage for conservation based on an inventory of impacted forest by a qualified forester. And therefore the town supervisor is hereby authorized and directed to execute and deliver the stipulation and to execute such other documents as may be reasonably necessary to give force and effect to that agreement. And legal counsel is authorized to file the executive stipulation in the orders proceeding for the South Ripley Solar Project. And therefore that this resolution shall take effect immediately. And the questions of the foregoing resolution was duly put to vote as follows. Okay, I will make that as a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion for the board? No? Everybody understand what this says? So you know.
Well, basically it's saying that the forester gonna have the final, basically the final say in all of it.
Well, he will.
As to how many acres
As to
and
how
that,
many
yeah.
As to how many acres need to be mitigated, correct. And authorizing me to sign the stipulation letter pending approval
Of
of
the forester.
town attorney
Town
and
attorney,
Labella's.
yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody's got to sign off on it.
And Labella's and the town attorney will get information that they need from the forester to accurately depict the number of acres that need to be mitigated. So. Okay? All right. Motion's been made and seconded. Roll call vote.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes. Motion carried. Thank you, Ben. Any other comments, questions?
Not at this time, no.
Okay.
Doug, Jim staff.
Yes.
Wondered if this mitigation plan takes into consideration the timber that has already been cut in South Ripley. In the project area, people that have signed up with them have cut the timber off already. Is this included in the 500 and some acres? And how many trees were lost for that? Does anybody understand that they have cut more than just what they're saying they're going to cut? They've been cut for the last 2 years.
I would say that if that's the case, maybe that information should be collected by the forester that's going to visit the site. It should be pretty apparent what's been cut recently. So if that is the case, I can't say one way or another. That would be appropriate information to have. You should be able to tell at least basal area on those trees that have been already cleared or cut, and whether that was a mature forest stand or not, and then include that in part of the discussion. That would be my answer to that question. Is again, there needs to be information to collect it, and that should be part of the information. So this is going to be a really a tailored, kind of a different information collecting exercise, if that is the case. So that all of that information should be translated to whatever forester is going to the site, so that they're collecting the appropriate information to be used to develop a mitigation plan. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah.
Yes. The Sinden Road, the whole road has been cut on the west side, pretty much.
Well, that should be translated to whichever forester is going to visit the site.
But the question being is, was this considered by connection in the 500 some acres or not?
So I don't know. Is Connection still here?
Yes, I'm on. And just to be clear, if you're asking the question, Connection has not done any cutting, so there is nothing to be calculated as part of the total.
But you sent out letters requesting the landowners cut it.
For the project in the spring of 2021. And they did so.
Well, regardless of that happened or not, I don't know. I haven't seen the letter. I'd love to see it. So send it my way. But I can tell you that I believe when we had the meeting with Connection, they said that they made these calculations based on data sets from the government and satellite imagery, which, are frequently not up to date. So if anything, the 523 might be an overestimate and maybe is not showing what's been cut, is what I'm saying. So I think that Dave's point, whoever's doing this needs to figure out, in Connection will give us this information. They will tell us how they came up with their number, and we will find out, it'll be obvious what has been cut and what hasn't been, and we'll come to the right number. And what the stipulation does, it allows us to be part of that process. I think that we're not trying to hide the ball on this. We are telling you, we don't know what the right number is right now, and Connection is agreeing they don't know what the right number is right now. But we developed a process where we're going to have input on finding out what that right number is.
And because you guys don't live here and we live in the middle of the project area, we just want you to be aware. And because we've seen letters that went out to landowners telling them to either clear cut the property in preparation for the project, or Connection would do so. And that's been going on for quite some time. And there's 10 to 12 logging areas that were in preparation in the project area by the property that was leased by Connection that needs to be included in this mitigation and in the total acreage. But that we just want you to be aware, because you don't live here, we see it every day.
So even when the mitigation plan is accepted, voted on, of course, the applicant's going to have to change their application in the draft permit to reflect this change, correct? And then also the HCA will have to be amended also, right?
No.
Why not?
The HCA is done.
No, but maybe Ben can answer that. But Ben, how will this impact the HCA?
So if you give me a minute, I can answer that. I have to look that up for this meeting, but I forgot. I don't think we're paying on a per megawatt basis. I think there's a minimum payment that's just a lump sum. And, I think I might have said the opposite to Doug, earlier today, thinking, because a lot of the HCAs are designed on a per megawatt basis, but I don't think yours is. So if you give me a couple minutes, I'll double check that while everyone else is asking questions, and I'll let you know. But the application would not need to be amended based on this. So the way these state processes work is there's a lot of information, for better or for worse, that is not finalized at the time the permit is awarded. And there's multiple plans that are included in the permit, which lead to the final information, which is filed as a compliance filing. So what we're doing here is we're making this forest mitigation plan a compliance filing situation, where we're acknowledging there's more work that needs to be done. Once we figure it out, we're going to do a compliance, well, not us, the developer is going to do a compliance filing on it. And only after they do that and all their other filings are they going to get, approval to proceed with construction. Does that make sense?
Yeah, understand. Okay, thanks, Ben.
Anything else?
So Supervisor Bowen, just real quick.
Yes.
So under the host community agreement, there's an initial section in section 4.1A, which defines a host community benefit payment in terms of dollars per megawatt. But then it says that's basically subject to the rest of the article. And later in the article, there's a minimum payment table which supersedes that and says that no matter what, in year one, it's $1 million, and then that escalates to $1,753,000 by year 30. So my reading of this is no, a reduction in the nameplate capacity would not impact the minimum revenue amount due to the town.
And Ben, that also, their language in there also referred to the fire district too. So, and the fire district was also megawatt, an X amount per megawatt.
So, but again, that was just an estimate of what the taxes would be.
The language, just the language itself.
Yeah. But again, that this agreement isn't a guarantee that will ever be paid. This is an estimate of what the developer, not what the town thought the districts would receive in tax revenue on a dollar per megawatt basis, assuming 270,000. But or 270, sorry.
Yeah.
But again, under the new assessment methodology, I don't know, I haven't played around with the model. Does anybody know, does the model take into account the nameplate capacity in the new assessment? Maybe some connection knows, I don't know. I guess the point is, suppose it might potentially reduce the total amount of special district taxes that are due as of right now. The way to get around that would be to try to have the district enter into a community agreement of some sort
Right.
with the developer or potentially with the town.
Right.
Okay. Okay, if there's nothing else, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Make that motion.
I'll take it.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Meeting's adjourned.
Does solar provide a net energy gain? Interesting question. Study done last year by Ferroni and Hopkirk for solar systems in Germany and Switzerland found that after you build the solar cells, put them in panels, construct them on the site and maintain them, and then you figure out how much energy, this analysis is called energy received over energy invested, I should say. The energy invested turns out to be bigger than the energy received. You only get 82% of the energy out that you put in. And I've translated this to North America. That 35-degree north latitude line is the break-even point. Anything north of there doesn't get as much energy out as you put in.